The morning after my granddaughter's graduation party, I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, watching the sprinklers come on across the street, thinking about a quilt. My attorney's office opened at 8:30. I called at 8:31. His assistant said he was with a client. I said I'd wait. She put me on hold for 4 minutes, and then he picked up, and I told him what I needed. There was a silence on his end that lasted long enough for me to count the sprinkler rotations. "Vivienne," he finally said, "are you absolutely certain? I told him I'd be there at 10. Let me back up. My name is Vivienne Holloway. I am 63 years old. I have lived in Raleigh, North Carolina for 31 years, in the same house I bought the year my daughter started kindergarten. The roof has been replaced twice. The kitchen has never been updated. The hydrangeas out front were planted by my mother when she visited in 1998, and they come back every June without being asked. I raised my daughter, Cora, alone. Her father and I divorced when she was 4. He moved to Phoenix, remarried, had 2 more children, and for a long time sent birthday cards that arrived 2 weeks late. Cora doesn't talk about him much. She never needed to. We were enough, the two of us. I worked. That's the whole story of my life, if you ask some people. I worked. For 17 years I cleaned houses. I'm not embarrassed by that. I was good at it. I was reliable, and the women I worked for trusted me with their keys and their children's medications and the combination to the safe behind the painting in the hallway. I knew which husband drank. I knew whose marriage was ending. I folded laundry and I kept my mouth shut and I saved every dollar I could. People hear house cleaner and they think they know the rest of the story. They think they know everything about you from that one fact. They picture a certain life, a certain apartment, a certain future. They picture someone who could never be a threat to anything they have. That's their mistake, not mine. I started buying properties in 2001. My first one was a duplex on Garner Road, 2 units, both occupied, priced low because the previous owner had let the plumbing deteriorate and the kitchen cabinets were held shut with bungee cords. My brother-in-law thought I'd lost my mind. My mother thought I was going to lose everything I'd saved. My clients, the ones who knew, smiled the polite way people smile when they think you're in over your head. I fixed the plumbing. I fixed the cabinets. I raised the rent modestly, kept my tenants, and within 14 months the rent was covering the mortgage and the insurance and still leaving something over. I bought another one and another. I kept cleaning houses for 6 more years after I bought that first duplex, partly because I needed the income while I was building, partly because I didn't want to explain myself to anyone. The women whose floors I mopped didn't know I owned the building. Their accountant worked in 3 blocks away. I preferred it that way. There's a freedom in being underestimated. I figured that out early. I never told Cora everything, not because I was hiding things from her, but because I wanted her to make her own way without the weight of expectations pressing down. I paid her college tuition, yes. I helped with her down payment on her condo, but I let her believe it came from careful saving and sacrifice, which was true. I just didn't tell her how much there was behind it. She graduated from NC State, got her MBA from Wake Forest. She works in healthcare administration now, manages a team of 40 people, earns a very good salary. She did that herself. I was proud in the way that makes your throat tight when you try to talk about it. And then she met him. His name is Preston Aldrich III. I know how that sounds. He's not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. He's pleasant enough. He has good manners when he bothers to use them. He went to Duke on a partial scholarship, works in commercial real estate, drives a car that costs more than my first property. He comes from a family that has had money for 3 generations and considers that fact a personality trait. His mother's name is Constance Aldrich. She is the kind of woman who says, "How charming," when she means, "How pathetic." She hosts a Christmas party every December that gets a write up in the Raleigh Society pages, and she has never, in the 4 years I've known her, called me by my first name without a pause first. The way you pause before you say a word you're not sure you're pronouncing correctly. Preston proposed to Cora on a trip to Savannah. She called me from the hotel room, crying and happy, and I sat on my kitchen floor and cried too because she was happy and because I already knew, in the way you know things about your children before the knowing fully forms into words, that something in this was going to be hard. The graduation party was not Cora's graduation. It was for Preston's younger sister, Hadley, who had just finished her undergraduate degree at Chapel Hill. Constance planned the whole thing, a dinner at their home in North Hills, 5,000 square feet, professionally decorated, the kind of house where every surface has been chosen to communicate a certain kind of worth. She invited 60 people. There was a caterer, a florist, a bartender in a white shirt. I was invited because I am going to be family. That was how Constance phrased it when she called. "We want you there, Vivienne, because you're going to be family." The pause before my name was half a second. I counted it. I brought a gift for Hadley. I'd spent 3 weeks making it. It was a quilt. I want you to understand what I mean when I say quilt. I don't mean something I bought at a craft store and wrapped up nicely. I mean something I made with my hands over the course of many evenings sitting at my dining room table with my reading glasses on, surrounded by fabric I had chosen deliberately. Hadley was an art history major. She loves color. She has a particular fondness for the American folk art tradition. She'd talked about it at length once at a family dinner, and I had listened carefully. So I made her a quilt in the style of the Gee's Bend quilters, one of the most celebrated American quilt-making traditions. Working class black women in Alabama whose art now hangs in the Smithsonian and the Whitney. Bold geometric blocks, strong colors, nothing fussy. I used fabric from different sources. Some I bought, some came from things that had meaning. A piece of the dress I wore to Cora's kindergarten graduation, a square from a shirt of my mother's that I'd kept folded in a box for 10 years. I folded it in acid-free tissue paper and put it in a box and tied it with a ribbon and wrote Hadley a card explaining what each fabric was. I was proud of it. I am not ashamed to say that. It took real skill and real time and real love, and I was proud of it. We arrived at 6. The house was full of Constance's people. Friends from the country club, Preston's father's business associates, Hadley's college friends who moved in bright clusters and laughed at things I couldn't hear from across the room. Cora stayed close to me for the first hour, which I appreciated, but then Preston found her and pulled her into a conversation with some of his Duke friends, and I found myself standing near the fireplace with a glass of sparkling water, watching the room. Constance floated toward me around 7, right after the dinner plates were cleared. She had on a cream-colored blouse and the expression she uses when she's about to say something she's already decided is reasonable. "Vivienne," she said. "So lovely." The pause was there. It's always there. We talked about nothing for a few minutes. The house, the party, Hadley's plans for graduate school, and then Hadley began opening gifts at the table, and people gathered around, and I stood near the back with my contribution on the table and its box and its ribbon. She opened the other gifts first, gift cards, a piece of jewelry from a boutique in 5 Points, a weekend at a spa in Asheville. Each one got the correct response, the bright smile, the hug, the held up item for the room to see. She got to my box. She opened the card first, which told me something about her actually. She read it. Her expression shifted into something real, something soft. She lifted the quilt out of the tissue paper and held it up, and there was genuine warmth in her face. "Oh," she said, "this is beautiful. This is really beautiful." "Are these?" She started reading the card again, and that's when Constance, standing 2 people to my left, said it. She said it quietly, the way people say things they want to be heard by some people but not others. She leaned slightly toward the woman next to her, one of her country club friends, and she said, "Homemade. How sweet. Something the help would bring." The woman next to her made a small sound that might have been a laugh. I felt it go through me like cold water, that specific cold, the kind that starts in your chest and moves outward. I looked at Cora. She was 4 feet away. She had heard it. I know she had heard it because her jaw shifted the way it does when she's keeping her face still on purpose. She looked down at her hands. She looked up at Preston. He was looking at his mother with an expression I couldn't read from where I was standing. He said nothing. Cora said nothing. The room kept moving. Hadley was still looking at the quilt, still reading the card, genuinely moved, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge what her mother had just said. Someone made a comment about the colors. The bartender refreshed glasses. The moment moved past the way moments do when the people who should speak choose not to. I set down my sparkling water on the fireplace mantel. I walked to the gift table. I picked up my box and my tissue paper and I folded the quilt back into it carefully, the way I'd folded it the first time, taking my time, not rushing. I was aware of the room noticing this. I was aware of Constance noticing this. I was aware of Cora watching me with an expression I couldn't look at directly. I tucked the box under my arm. I retrieved my purse from the coat closet by the front door. I found Hadley, who was now standing near the dessert table, and I said, quietly and without making a scene, "I'm so proud of you. I wish you every good thing." I kissed her cheek. She looked confused and a little stricken. I walked out. Preston's father was standing near the front door talking to someone, and he said, "Leaving so soon?" with the automatic hospitality of a man who isn't tracking the conversation very closely. I said, "Thank you for the lovely evening," and I meant none of it. I sat in my car in their driveway for a moment. The lights inside the house moved behind the windows. I could see Constance's silhouette, the bright shift of guests, the warm yellow glow that houses give off when they're full of people who belong to each other. I drove home. I put the quilts on my dining room table. I made a cup of chamomile tea. I sat in my kitchen and I thought about my mother sewing the dress I wore to Cora's kindergarten graduation, a pale green with white buttons, and about the years I spent on my knees on other people's floors, and about the 38 units I currently own in Wake County. And the building on Glenwood Avenue, where Preston Aldrich III has his office. I sat there for a while, then I went to bed. Cora called at 11:15. I let it ring. She called again at 11:42. I silenced the phone and lay in the dark looking at the ceiling. She texted at midnight, "Mom, please. I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. I did not respond. I am not a dramatic person. I have never been the kind of woman who makes scenes or issues ultimatums or performs her pain for an audience. I grew up in a household where you kept moving, where you didn't stop to examine things too closely because stopping was a luxury. I cleaned other people's houses for 17 years without complaint. I have absorbed 1,000 small dismissals in my life and kept going. But there is a difference between absorbing something and accepting it. And there is a difference between keeping the peace and disappearing yourself for someone else's comfort. Cora knew who I was. Cora knew what my hands had done and what they'd built. She had stood 4 feet away and let her future mother-in-law call me the help, and she had looked at her hands. That was the part I couldn't put down. Not Constance. Constance. I had already known. It was Cora's hands I kept seeing. At 8:30 the next morning, I called my attorney. His name is Bernard Okafor. He has handled my real estate holdings for 9 years, and he knows my financial picture as well as anyone alive. When I told him what I wanted to do, he went quiet for long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Vivienne," he said, "you want to think about this for a few days first." I told him I'd been thinking about it since 11:15 the previous night. I told him I'd be there at 10. I put on a gray blazer. I drove to his office on Six Forks Road. The receptionist offered me coffee. I took it. Bernard came out to meet me, which he doesn't usually do, and he shook my hand with both of his, which he also doesn't usually do. He's a careful man. He doesn't emote in professional settings. The fact that he used two hands told me he understood what I was carrying. We sat in his office. He pulled up my files on his screen. He turned the monitor slightly toward me so I could see. I have 31 properties in Wake County, residential and small commercial. Combined current market value as of the last appraisal cycle is approximately $7.8 million. Annual rental income after expenses is in the range of $380,000. I have no mortgage debt on 24 of the properties. The remaining 7 are in various stages of paydown. I have a will. It was written in 2019. Everything, with the exception of specific smaller bequests to my brother and to 3 organizations I care about, goes to Cora. I want to change it, I told Bernard. He looked at me over his glasses. All of it, he said. The structure, I said. I don't want to leave anything outright. I want to trust. Restricted. The terms will be specific. I had thought about this on the drive over. I had thought about it lying awake at midnight looking at the ceiling. I was not acting out of anger, though I was angry. I was acting out of clarity. Because here is what I had understood. Sitting alone in my kitchen at 1 in the morning, what Constance had said about me was a reflection of what she believed about people who work with their hands. But what Cora had done, the looking away, the silence, that was a choice. That was my daughter deciding in that moment that keeping her place at that table mattered more than I did. And if that was the calculus she was running, then she needed to understand what was actually on the table. I did not intend to punish her. I intended to make things clear. Bernard drafted the framework over the next 2 weeks. The trust is structured so that the assets remain intact and continue generating income, and that income is distributed to causes I've named: a women's housing nonprofit I've supported for years, a scholarship fund at the community college where I took my first real estate course in 1999, and a small foundation I've set up in my mother's name for girls aging out of foster care in Wake County. Cora is not excluded, but her inheritance is no longer a given. There are conditions. They're not punitive conditions. They're not punitive conditions. They're honest ones. The kind of conditions that say, I see you, and I need you to see me back. Bernard asked me if I wanted to tell her. I said not yet. Cora came to my house on a Sunday, 3 days after the party. She brought pastries from the bakery on Hillsborough Street that I've loved since she was small. She put them on the kitchen counter and she stood in the middle of my kitchen in her good coat and she looked at me. I should have said something, she said. I know I should have said something. I poured her coffee. I poured myself coffee. I sat down at the table, and after a moment she sat across from me. "Why didn't you?" I asked her. She was quiet for a moment. She has her father's eyes, but my hands, wide palms, capable looking, and she had them wrapped around her mug like it was something she needed to hold on to. "I didn't want to make a scene," she said. "At whose expense?" I said. She didn't answer. Cora, I said. I mopped floors for 17 years so that you would never have to. I drove 40 minutes each way, 3 days a week, for 3 years so you could take violin lessons. I did not go to Paris when your grandmother invited me because the airfare would have taken the money I needed for your college fund. I have never in your entire life asked you to defend me. That was the first time, and you looked at your hands. She was crying. I wasn't. I had moved past the part where I needed to cry about it. His mother is. She started. I know what his mother is, I said. That's not what I'm talking about. She nodded. She wiped her face. She's 34 years old, and sometimes when she cries, she still looks exactly like the 4-year-old she was the morning her father drove away with his things in the car. We sat in the kitchen for another hour. We ate the pastries. I asked about her week, and she asked about my hydrangeas, and we talked around the center of it, the way you do when the center of it is too hot to touch directly. When she left, she hugged me at the door for a long time. She said, I love you, Mom. I said I loved her too. Both of those things were true. They've always been true. Love doesn't stop. But love also isn't the only thing that matters in a relationship. Trust matters. And seeing each other matters. And I was not sure, standing at the door watching her walk to her car, that we had fully established whether she saw me. 3 weeks after I signed the trust paperwork, I got a call from Preston. He had never called me directly before. It was always Cora who called. He said he wanted to apologize. He said he'd heard what his mother said and that he should have spoken up immediately, and he was sorry he hadn't. He said he had since talked to his mother and that the conversation had been, his word, uncomfortable. I appreciated that he called. I told him so. I also told him that I thought he was a decent man who had grown up in a particular kind of environment and was still in the process of figuring out what he actually believed versus what he'd been raised to assume. I told him that Cora was the best person I knew and that she deserved someone who would stand up for her, and that standing up for her would sometimes mean standing up against his own family. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Yes, ma'am. I don't know what kind of man Preston Aldrich III will ultimately be. I know he has the material. What he does with it is between him and whatever he decides his life is actually about. About Constance, I have not spoken to her since that evening. I understand that at some point, if this marriage happens, I will have to be in rooms with her. I am prepared for that. I have been in rooms with difficult people my entire life. I know how to be civil. I know how to hold my face still and keep my voice even and take up exactly as much space as I'm entitled to and not 1 inch less. What she doesn't know, what none of them know yet, is that the building where the Aldrich Group leases its office space on Glenwood Avenue has been in my portfolio since 2014. I bought it from an estate sale for considerably less than it was worth because the estate needed to close quickly and I had cash available. I've had it managed by a third-party property management company since acquisition, which is why the Aldrich name on the lease never created a connection in anyone's mind. I have no intention of doing anything with that information. I'm not in the business of petty moves. I'm in the business of building things that last. But I know it, and knowing things, I've found, has its own kind of quiet weight. The quilt is still on my dining room table. I've been looking at it for weeks now, touching the edges of it when I pass. The piece of my mother's shirt is in the bottom left corner. A faded blue cotton with a small floral print, something she wore in the garden. I cut it from a blouse that had a stain on the front that would never come out, and I saved the back panel all these years, and I put it into this quilt for a girl I was trying to welcome into my family. I keep thinking about what Hadley's face looked like when she lifted it out of the tissue paper, before her mother said anything, that real expression, the genuine one, the one that said she understood what she was holding. Maybe I'll give it to her still someday. Maybe I'll give it to her still someday. Maybe at the wedding, if there is one. Maybe I'll find the right moment and I'll put it in her hands and tell her what the blue cotton is from. Or maybe I'll keep it. Maybe it belongs here, in my house, on my table, in the room where I've made every decision that has ever actually mattered. I haven't decided yet. What I have decided is this: I am 63 years old and I have built something real from nothing with my hands. Over 30 years of early mornings and careful choices and a very specific refusal to be what other people assumed I was. I have a daughter I love who is still learning how to be brave. I have a building full of tenants who pay their rent and whose names I know and whose calls I return. I have hydrangeas that come back every June without being asked. I am not the help. I never was. And anyone who has spent more than 5 minutes in a room where I am standing should have known better than to think so. I've been thinking a lot lately about what we teach people by what we tolerate. Not what we say, what we tolerate. When I was young, I believed that if you worked hard enough and kept quiet enough and made yourself useful enough, people would eventually see you clearly, that the truth of who you were would become self-evident. I believed that for a long time. I cleaned floors and saved money and built something real from nothing, and I told myself that the work spoke for itself. What I know now at 63 is that the work only speaks to people who are willing to listen. And some people have already decided what they're hearing before you open your mouth, before you walk through the door. The moment they learn what you do or where you came from, the story is written. You become a category, and everything you do after that gets filtered through the category, not through the truth. Constance didn't see a woman who had spent 3 weeks making something by hand out of love and history. She saw the help. That was a failure of her character, and I've made my peace with that. What took me longer was Cora, because what Cora did or didn't do was a different kind of thing. It wasn't cruelty, it was fear. Fear of disrupting the table she'd worked hard to earn a seat at, fear of the discomfort that comes from choosing your mother over your future. I understand that fear. I lived inside a version of it for years, staying quiet in rooms where I should have spoken, making myself small so that nothing would be disturbed. But here is what I've learned about the moments when we stay quiet. They compound. Every time you look at your hands instead of speaking, it becomes slightly easier to look at your hands the next time, and the time after that, until one day you realize you've built an entire life around making other people comfortable at the expense of your own dignity. And by then, the cost is enormous. I didn't change my will to punish Cora. I want to be honest about that, the way I try to be honest about everything I do. I changed it because I realized that love without honesty is just a comfortable arrangement. And I had been so focused on loving her that I had not been honest with her about what she was inheriting. Not just the properties, not just the money, but the thing underneath all of it. The understanding that you build a life by choosing over and over again what you will not accept. Difficulty builds something in you that comfort cannot. I know this because I lived it. Every hard morning on someone else's floor, every repair I made myself because I couldn't afford a contractor, every person who smiled and assumed I had no future, all of it built something in me. Resilience isn't the word I prefer. Resilience sounds like surviving. What I built was sturdier than that. It was the ability to look clearly at a situation, name what it actually is, and act from that clarity rather than from fear. That's what I want for Cora. Not the money, the clarity. The quilt is still on my dining room table. Some mornings I walk past it and I think about my mother's hands cutting that blue cotton in her garden, about everything that gets passed down that doesn't have a dollar value. And I think every choice I've made, the good ones and the hard ones, has been a stitch in something. You don't always know what you're making while you're making it, but if you keep going, keep choosing honestly, keep refusing to become what other people assume, eventually you look up and you see it. Something whole, something yours. That's the only inheritance that actually lasts.